Hi, I'm Jimmy Palmiotti, writer of The Jetsons, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
Scooby, look! What? Like we're gonna be sliced and diced for sure! Help! Help! Like help!
Welcome to episode 34 of the podcast. On this installment of the show, I conclude my marathon interview conversation with writer and pop culture historian Mark Evanier. Now, this is another long one. They've all been long ones, but I guarantee you that neither Mark nor I waste any of your time during this stretch of the chat. Mark continues to talk about the development of Scrappy over at Hanna-Barbera and the execution of that character in the Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo show. He also tells some more stories about working for Ruby Spears Animation, and he also fills in the gaps on something I heard about a while ago, needed some confirmation for, and wanted to know the background of comic book legend Jack Kirby working on Scooby-Doo. Kind of came out of left field for me when I first heard it, although I'm not entirely surprised because I know Jack worked in animation. But it was cool to kind of get that background regardless. If this is your first time checking the show out, I would recommend checking out the previous two installments of the interview. Part 1 and Part 2 are available wherever you found this one. But all three parts do generally kind of stand alone. You can listen to them beginning to end and get a satisfying conversation. But I would encourage you to go and check those out if you haven't already. And again, like with those other episodes, this is a long one, so I'm going to cut the intro as short as I can. I'm going to let you get to the conversation part, and I will join you on the other side for my outro. So enjoy part 3 of my conversation with Mark Evanier, and I will see you on the other side.
What else? I'm telling you a lot of stuff that isn't about Scooby here, so forgive me.
No, this is exactly what I'm here for. One of the reasons why I have these conversations is kind of like clearing up the puppy power thing, or at least getting another angle on the puppy power thing, because I know, there's that story that, Fred Silverman, he heard the Frank Sinatra on the airplane, and I've heard other people say, I think Joe Ruby said in an interview that Joe Barbera came up with the Scooby-Doo, and I think in Ewo's biography he mentions that the name was floating around Hanna-Barbera for like a couple of years or something, because there's always character designs and concepts and names that are just there and unused.
Yeah.
So there's like this mythology, and then there's sort of what people actually observed, and just trying to sift through and get the different stories to get a potential truth to it,
Yeah, there's probably some truth in most of those stories. And I have found over the years, especially when you're in an animation studio setting, and work is handed from one person to another, and people are working in the same meetings and pitching ideas at the same time, it's very hard to keep track of where some things came from. A lot of people would say, I came up with that, and they're not lying. They came up with some aspect of it, maybe, and it got, the characters get changed. You've seen, many examples of prototypes of animated characters where, here's how they looked 5 drawings before they decided on the final version. You've seen these over and over again. And, at what point did that character start becoming the final character? It maybe not have been in the next to last drawing. Look at all the different versions of Bugs Bunny there were.
Yeah.
People will still debate which is the first Bugs Bunny cartoon because, well, he's kind of like Bugs in this one. Well, he's a little more like Bugs in this one, and there's a little traits in each one that we now think of as part of the entirety of Bugs Bunny. And and did he even become Bugs Bunny in Pole until Mel gave him the voice? So you can't necessarily nail this down to one person on one day created it. And you're right to investigate this stuff, but you're wrong if you think you're going to get irrefutable answers to some of this stuff.
Oh, I don't expect to.
Because it's very amorphous. There are cases where someone creates something by themselves or mostly by themselves. There are those cases, absolutely. But there are also cases where a project, the Scrappy-Doo show, Scrappy-Doo probably went through 30 hands before it got to me. And each of those people may have contributed a little something. Sometimes even a person who took it in the wrong direction may have helped you find the right direction.
Yeah.
So I don't even know all who worked on what was handed to me. Various people in the building came up to me and they said, "Hey, they showed an outline I wrote?" And they'd given me, copies of everything that people had done, and I didn't read most of it because there was just too much conflicting ideas in it. So I took a lot of what Joe Barbera told me, and I don't know some of his ideas. I don't know if they were his ideas or if they came from things other people had submitted.
I was curious about watching The Scarab Lives Again. You just sort of drop right into it. Like, there's no introduction of Scrappy other than the opening titles. And I know that television was different back in the 70s, having lived through the 70s. Wasn't always necessary to have, like the big origin story, whatever. But I wondered if there was any kind of logic around that, or... Well,
yeah, I can tell you. First of all, you always remembering that the deal to do this series was to run every episode 4 times. I think we made 13 that season, or 16?
I think it was 13.
Was there 13 the first season? Yeah, okay. So the deal was the 13 episodes and each run 4 times. So, there's not a first episode per se. It just blends in because...
You never know when it's going to air.
Yeah, that's right. And secondly, these shows were produced so fast and so on getting at the last minute. Do you remember how networks used to do these Saturday morning preview specials in prime time?
Yes.
They would do the show that ran the night before, and they would, show, here's a preview of the new shows debuting tomorrow morning on our network, kids. I produced about 5 of those. And in each case, we had to tape like 2 days before the special aired because there were no clips. The shows were not back yet from Korea or Taiwan or Philippines, wherever they were being edited. Literally, and I'm not exaggerating, we were getting the footage of some of these shows 28 hours before the show debuted on Saturday morning, 30 hours before. And so they're coming back at the last minute, and they would frequently air with mistakes because they came in with mistakes. They were delivered with mistakes, and there was no time to fix them. Occasionally, they'd go back and fix them for the second or third airing, but some of these shows went on the air with some egregious mistakes in them because they had just gotten off of the plane. So what happened was we did not know. We knew what the first episode being produced was, but we weren't sure which the first episode aired would be, because it's entirely possible that if show 2 came back before show 1, or show 1 came back with lots of mistakes that needed to be fixed, and show 2 was back in time to air it, they would have slotted it first. So we couldn't do an introducing Scrappy-Doo episode, because it might not be the first show that aired.
Fair enough.
And also because we wanted it to seamlessly disappear into the mix after the first run. So that's why, you got to remember here that what aired on the Scarab Lives, that first episode, was a script I wrote, and I rewrote it a couple of drafts, and then, Dwayne and Tom rewrote a few pieces of it, and the network had some notes, and some things were changed by other hands, and then, they time it out, and all of a sudden it's 4 minutes over length, and they got to cut something. One of the nice things about doing comic books is that they usually come out pretty much the way you intend. But on TV shows, this is why I could watch, have to watch an old Goldie Gold and figure out, did I write this? Did I write this one? Because they're removed from you. They go through so many hands. And when I was writing sitcoms, I could sit at home and go, oh, there's my joke. Oh, that's my line. Oh, yeah, I wrote that line, that speech. But there was other people's stuff in there, too. Even if I got the sole credit on the episode, there were other people contributing things. The actors might rewrite a line, or the director might change something, the producers might change something.
Yeah.
And so, if you ask me to go through the scarab lib script, and please don't, and say, why'd you do this, why'd you do that, I may not have done it. My job, I considered my job a success when ABC said, yeah, we'll pick it up. That was the job.
Yeah.
I got a bonus for that, not for the, I got a bonus check because ABC said yes. And then other people could rewrite it and did. I played with it, and I did some rewrites. And some down in the basement of Hanna-Barbera, a film editor cut 3 minutes out of it probably. And he cut lines out and stuff. So you can't sometimes figure out exactly who did what. And if you can't figure out who did what, you can't figure out why it was done.
I'm debating on whether I should ask you any questions about Demon of the Dugout. We kind of talked about it a little bit before, but
I don't remember a word of it.
Okay.
I remember writing it. I think I did a draft, first draft of it, and then Dwayne and Tom said, okay, we'll take it from here. And I think they did quite a few rewrites on it. They made their decisions on what had to be changed, and you have to hand it off to them, when I did the Dungeons and Dragons show, I did the pilot, and I worked on one other script shortly after that. But then I was too busy to work on the series. So you hand it off to other people. It's not yours anymore. And they're going to take it in different directions. They're going to do things that you wouldn't do. And they're going to change characters or put their own stamp on it. And that's what has to happen with teamwork. It's not like, some of the comic books I do, which are just me and one artist.
Yeah.
There were probably on a show like a season of Scrappy-Doo and Scooby-Doo stuff, how many artists and writers and storyboard guys and model character designers and the music guy and the sound effects editor and the editors who decided what 4 minutes had to come out of it, all those people had input. And so you have to not be possessive about it. You can be proud of what you did. You can be very proud of it and think, oh, I did a good job on that, or maybe I didn't do that good a job on this one. But you have to not be possessive of something that belongs to the whole team.
One of the things that I found interesting about reading your Scrappy Days articles was at the conclusion, you point out that you are not one of those people who has ill will towards the character. I know in speaking with Dwayne, he said that around the studio, some people would refer to him as Crappy-Doo. But anybody I've talked to who's written for the character has some affection for him. I was kind of wondering, considering how his trajectory has kind of gone in pop culture, I haven't sat down and really pinpointed when the world sort of turned on Scrappy, but I'm curious why you think they might have turned on Scrappy.
I don't know. I think there's less of it than some people think. I think it became kind of an funny joke to dump on him. I mean, you come right down to this. What, Scrappy is the guy who ruined Scooby-Doo? I mean, I don't get that the hatred of Scrappy-Doo comes from anybody who likes Scooby-Doo in the first place.
Yeah, good point.
Really, often. I was kind of surprised when I heard about that. I think the first time I ever heard that people hated Scrappy-Doo was Lenny Weinrib called me, and he had been on the internet, and he looked himself up, as we all do on the internet, and he found some really angry people screaming how Scrappy-Doo was, the Antichrist of animation, and everybody involved with it should be murdered. And he called me up. He says, "What is this hostility about this character?" It was some of the hostility was directed towards Lenny, who just read the lines that he was given to read, and read them very well, I thought. I don't know. I don't understand getting upset about anything relating to Scooby-Doo. It's a show that people have loved. It's been on for decades and decades. It's going to be on forever. Scooby will outlive all of us. Kids will be watching that, and they'll be imitating Don Messick's voice in the next century. Kids will be doing that ruh-roh voice and loving it. And I think that, Don Messick's voice had an awful lot to do with the affection for that character.
Yeah.
As far as Scrappy goes, I think he kind of tore at the fabric of Scooby because he talked. The original premise of Scooby-Doo was a world where there were no ghosts. All ghosts were fake. All ghosts were not real. And they were all hoaxes. And then one season, because it was commercial, they did an hour of guest star things, and I think it was one with Speed Buggy. So, Scooby-Doo and the talking car are proving there's no ghosts. And who else was in that? They did one with.
Well, they had an Addams Family episode.
They did characters. Yeah, they did. But they did some incredible characters in there that should not have existed in Scooby's world. And all of a sudden, he was, in the Laugh Olympics, the character who lives in a world where there's no ghosts is hanging out with talking bears and genies and I mean, there's no sense of a consistent world reality. It would be like if you were doing Winnie the Pooh, and all of a sudden a Martian walked through it. You go, no, yeah, that's not part of this world. And for all I know, they've done that at Disney. I haven't seen all the Winnie the Poohs, but you'd like there to be a little consistency. And the fact that Scrappy-Doo could talk, which I objected to at first, was wrong. But so was a lot of stuff. And then 2 seasons later, they decided to make the stories interesting. Scrappy or Scooby and Shaggy would be running from real monsters and real ghosts and real creatures. So the whole premise there changed.
I'd often thought that the tipping point was that second season of Scooby and Scrappy, where they went to the 11-minute episodes and they got rid of Fred and Daphne and Velma. So you had that. It's like having the comedy duo where there's the funny guy and the straight guy, and you just get rid of the straight guy. And so there's nothing to play off of. It's all gags.
Yeah, I
kind of like where you're going with the gradual sort of degradation of the sort of rules of, I guess, Scooby physics in a way.
Yeah. There are episodes where Scooby almost talks, where it's like Shaggy can understand, words that come out of his mouth. They're English with the letter R in front of them. I think that the premise was there was a premise that was consistent in the early episodes, and they were getting away from it. They got away from it with Scrappy Dumb and some of the other add-ons that were done. And they got away from it, where when they got into real monsters showing up. And I think the Scooby-Doo show was on too long in some fashions. And maybe Scrappy was the year that Scooby had done one too many years. I don't know. From a selling standpoint, it was needed to convince ABC to pick it up. If I'd been ABC, I might have said, maybe we've done enough Scooby-Doos for a while. But the character was very beloved, and I think they were afraid not to pick it up or feared another network would.
Yeah. So not being a fan, if you had to pick a Scooby-Doo series, if you had to revisit one, which one would it be? Would it be the original or one of the following series?
Well, probably the original. It's not that I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a guy who's seen every episode. I've watched a number of them. I think it's fine. It's not my favorite Hanna-Barbera show. I'm not sure it's anybody's favorite cartoon show. But I think there's something very comforting about those characters. They are very friendly. They have a chemistry that is lacking in all the shows that had 4 kids and something walking around. There's a whole bunch of those shows that had 3 kids and a something or other. We had it at Ruby Spears at one time. Somebody made up a thing they posted on the board. I forget what they called it. It was called the Nya machine. It was a little bunch of cardboard wheels. You spun it, and the first wheel would say 3 kids, or 4 kids, or 5 kids, and then the next wheel would say a dog, a cat, or whatever. And then the next wheel would say, solve mysteries, fight crime, whatever. So you spin it, and it would be like 5 kids and a goat live in the future. And sometimes, 4 kids and a shark in the future is Jabberjaw. And you could spin this wheel and create that formula show very simple. And the fact is that almost none of those shows, and there were sure enough of them, had characters that endeared themselves to the public the way Fred, Velma, Daphne, and Shaggy did.
Yeah.
And, of course, Scooby-Doo was the best one of those characters. You know, I worked on a few pilots and things where we've got a show here. It's 3 kids and a talking duck, try to change history or something like that. Whatever it was, you go through these things, and it's a bunch of kids and try to do something. And I think that probably the early Scooby-Doos, after maybe even if you talk about the second or third year, when they really found a way to do it, and there was some clever stuff in the second or third. In episodes, I've never seen them, these episodes in full over the whole season, so I've seen selected episodes here and there, and my sense is that the second and third year had some really clever mysteries and some really, and also some ways in which Shaggy and Scooby made a contribution without just crashing into somebody. I think there were too many episodes where their contribution was that somebody tripped over them.
Yeah.
But it's a great show that's endured. I can't see how many people love it. I go to chalk talks occasionally in elementary schools. I teach kids cartooning. And I'll tell you, nothing gets a reaction like when I teach them how to draw Scooby. They love him. Love that character, and they all will go row and try to imitate his voice. He is an absolute superstar of animation, possibly the biggest one ever created for daytime television. As big as some of these other characters were, like Huck and Yogi and such. The characters created wholly for daytime kids animation. Scooby is the all-time champ, and you can't fault that. I mean, you can, but it's kind of silly to deny that popularity. I don't dislike Scooby. It's just not. It's something that it took me a while to get used to and to appreciate fully. And like I said earlier, or if you cut this into pieces, 3 or 4 parts ago, I think you have to watch a bunch of them to really fully love the characters and to understand them and to feel for them. Because I think one episode of Scooby-Doo does not capture the reliability of the material.
Yeah.
It's very comforting that those characters are always in character. That's why I felt it was a mistake to try to make them young, to make them do the baby version, the kid version of it, because I think one of the things Scooby always had going for itself was the reliability. Everything else in the world changed, but Scooby's the same.
It is a pretty flexible concept, though. I've said this before on the podcast, and I think it was Chris Carter originally, creator of the X-Files, who I had heard it from, because he was talking about taking the characters of Mulder and Scully, and when they started really pushing the X-Files into really weird places, and he said, you have these characters, properties in pop culture where they achieve a level of elasticity. It's like you can put Superman or Batman into just about any situation, and then the next month, or the next movie, or the next whatever, people are just like, oh, okay, the other Batman is back. Like, people are willing to accept that. So I think Scooby's at that point. I think it's been at that point for a while, and I think that's why, like, for some people, that pup named Scooby-Doo that's the series for them. It's so beloved because it hit them at the right time, at the right age.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This is something we should allude to here. What you come to first is what you believe, usually. What you fall in love with. I mentioned a couple times this man I work for named Jack Kirby, and I spend a lot of my comic conventions talking to people about Jack Kirby. And, the question comes up, what was your favorite, of all the hundreds of things Jack did, what was your favorite Jack Kirby project? And it's usually the first one. That's pure Kirby. That's the one I fell in love with. That's my favorite. And everything else is kind of an aberration. I mean, maybe wonderful, but, he really got it right with that comic, because that's the one that represents my childhood to me. It represents where I first discovered the wonderment of his bag of tricks and his vocabulary and his visual vocabulary. So, I mean, I came to Hanna-Barbera at the very start. I watched Rough and Ready when it first aired in 58. I think it was 57, 58. I watched Huckleberry Hound the day it debuted. I loved Huckleberry Hound. I watched Yogi Bear. I watched Quick Draw. I watched all those cartoons. And they were so powerful to me that the very first time Hanna-Barbera put their cartoons out on home video, this was in the days of beta, they hired me to pick out the cartoons to be on the first release, and I did it from memory. I called my father and I said, remember how you said watching all those cartoons wouldn't lead to anything? I just got paid because I remembered cartoons I watched when I was 8 years old.
That's fantastic.
He laughed. He thought that was great, But to me, those early shows, Yogi Bear, Flintstones, the Jetsons, Top Cat, the cutoff point for me is like half past Secret Squirrel. And I would throw in the Wacky Races, which I liked a lot. And after that, I don't dislike the stuff, but it just doesn't. I don't have the emotional connection to it that I have to the early shows, because the shows after that were not part of my childhood.
That's fair.
They were not where I discovered the wonders of animation. It's a lot like, you probably have a neighborhood restaurant that you think serves the best hamburgers in the world because that's where you first had hamburgers. And that's where you learn the joy of a hamburger. So, the cartoons can also function that way. Any entertainment, media can do that. But as far as just evaluating, what's a good show there, I think that the second, third, fourth seasons of Scooby deliver what they promise. And the first one to some extent. The first one's got a few things that are, not quite thought through yet. But if you like that premise at all, they deliver very well what they were promising.
Yeah.
And I I'll tell you something, which is that I did not work on if you take all my Scooby work together, the comic books and the TV stuff. I am probably I might possibly be near the end of the top 100 contributors to Scooby-Doo in terms of volume. I didn't do that much, and yet there are people who come to me, like those kids at school, who are nuts about it, and they're so thrilled. You worked on Scooby-Doo, God, that was great. We love Scooby-Doo, and I am the recipient of a certain amount of that affection, even though I did nothing to deserve it. Scooby-Doo was not wonderful because of me. You get very lucky sometimes where you can associate with something people love, and by transference, they love you for it, even though you didn't do anything, even though you didn't make any real contribution to what they love. You were on the premises. You had a connection to it, and they think that's wonderful. You're interviewing me right now, and we've been interviewing. This interview's been going on now for 422 hours because I had a connection to Scooby-Doo. And it is not one of the major things of my career, but I'm glad I'm had a piece of it. I'm glad I had a little hand in it.
But you're also,
half a fingernail.
When it comes to remembrances, like other interviews I've heard from you, the places you've been and the things you remember about where you've been, like it's not just the Scooby-Doo, it's the people's paths you've intersected with, it's the places you've worked, the cultures that you've been a part of. Like, not as many people have that same narrative as you do, and the ability to articulate that. Well,
I've been enormously fortunate. I've met an awful high percentage of the people whose work I grew up loving, both in comic books and television. I was at a right time in my life where I knew Joe Barbera and Bill Hanna. People come up to me these days and they say, "Did you really know Hanna and Barbera? Did you really know Tex Avery? Did you really know Jack Kirby? Did you really know Bob Clampett?" And it's like, they're saying, "Have you really met the Easter Bunny?" And I was fortunate enough to know Mel Blanc and Dawes Butler and June Foray and Bill Scott, and in a way that I don't think a kid who's now 30, 25, let's say, or 20, is going to feel when they're my age. I'm 67 right now, because I met a lot of people who were pioneers in their field. They invented the business. They didn't just do good work in it; they invented it. These are people who started before television was invented. At the June Foray Memorial we had 2 years ago, I said, or maybe I wrote this line. I think I said I wrote some other people's speeches there. But I said, June Foray had a career that lasted long enough to start in the golden age of radio and to end in the era of video games. It is like every few years, technology invented some new way to give June Foray a job. She did radio shows, she did theatrical animation, she did TV animation, she did, all these things, all these new forms that came up and all this new technology, and they're recording her with brand new machines that didn't exist 10 years ago. And they're editing her work with things that didn't work, that didn't exist before. That sense of history is very real. And I'm very fortunate. This is not a brag. This is an acknowledgement of good luck that I got to meet a lot of these people. In 1963, I saw and fell in love with the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And I just loved that movie. It was a life-changing experience seeing it. I don't want to even debate people who think it's a bad movie. It was something that was very important to me at that time in my life. And I got to work with Sid Caesar and Jonathan Winters and two-thirds of the people in it. Lenny Weinrib is in that movie doing voiceovers. You hear the voice of Lenny Weinrib in that movie. And Marvin Kaplan, I was good friends with Marvin. He's in the movie. I worked with Arnold Stang, who's in that movie, and another great cartoon voice actor. This is a very fortunate thing, and I've obviously taken a lot of time here to tell you all these stories because I feel like in my position I've been entrusted with a lot of anecdotes that need to be preserved and shared with the world.
Yeah.
And I can answer some questions about, Scrappy-Doo or Hanna-Barbera or things like that. I feel a compulsion, like it would be sin if I sat on all this experience and didn't share it with other people. And I know there are people who will listen to this and say, "Oh, he's just talking about all the people he's met and all the things he's done." Well, people should do that. I haven't said one word about, I was brilliant about it and stuff, because I don't believe that. I believe I was just lucky to be in the right place. And someday someone will take this podcast and other things that have been dug up, and they will build on your history. You've done this wonderful research here that is important, and it's glad you're doing it. And we both wish that somebody had done this when some of the other people were alive to be interviewed.
Yeah.
But you're preserving something. One of the great things about the internet is very few things ever go away on it. After you're gone, somebody will have archived these interviews, and someone will use them for a research project 50 years from now. And I like putting what I observed and knew into the zeitgeist so that it's there, and it's there for people can listen to, and they can judge it, and like that. And Scooby-Doo is important. It's an important character.
I agree. It's in animation history. It's something that's so glossed over, and it's like,
yes,
guys, this thing has endured for 50 years.
Yeah.
When it was absolute crap, and when it was, at the height of its creative powers, this thing just kept going. But people are like, "Oh, it's Scooby-Doo," and I can't believe Warner Brothers doesn't support it more with the documentaries on their DVDs, and they're all just these like EPK talking head things. And I know you've probably been a part of a few of them.
Yeah, I have. I think I'm in the Scooby Dynamite DVD talking about stuff like that. And I don't like doing it. I don't like being on camera. I much prefer this to being on camera, because I think you get pretentious when you're on camera doing this kind of stuff. You don't need to see me to extract the information I have. You can listen to me just as well. Seeing me doesn't add anything to it.
And I'm such a bonus features person. I have a history degree. I have an archival sort of bent to how I approach media, and my frustration with just the lack. Like there's some stuff about the 69 series, but not much else. And you really have to dig for it. And I was like, I guess nobody else is doing it.
Yeah. And don't you wish you'd been around when there's 25 people you could name you wish you could have interviewed, including Bill and Joe.
Bill and Joe, Ewo, like right now, Ruby and Spears are kind of my holy grail, especially in 50th year here. But that's been a bit of a struggle. The info I have has not been good.
Those are two great guys, and I hope people know how hard those guys worked and how much they fought a very pernicious system at times to do good work. Those guys worked very hard, and in a situation like Hanna-Barbera, sometimes you find yourself taking great pride in stopping something from stinking a little more. You feel like you stopped a bad thing from happening. The show may not have turned out the way you wanted it to, but it would have been a lot worse if not for your efforts.
Yeah.
And Joe and Ken delivered some very, whether everybody can judge for themselves if they didn't like Dynamite or they didn't like Jabberjaw. I'm sure there's a vast array of opinions and always will be on that. But my opinion is those guys did better work than the system should have allowed. The system allowed. They managed to work under very difficult conditions, sometimes for not very good money also, but they still managed to produce a system better than let me see if I can say this cleanly. They produced work better than the system encouraged. They produced better work, and a lot of it shows that kids love today, and kids who were not born when those shows went on. That's another nice part of this.
And those are usually the personalities that create the things that do last. The people who are working against the system and still manage to squeak that thing through. Yeah.
Yeah. I worked on Plastic Man for Ruby Spears before Ruby Spears was absorbed by Taft and became part of Hanna-Barbera. And I know, and from my standpoint, that show, well, it had flaws in it and had some very bad animation and budget problems and things like that. That show came out better being done at Ruby Spears than it would have been done if the same show had been done at Hanna-Barbera, even if they hired most of the same writers and artists. They built a better studio, even if the shows didn't always come out that well. You couldn't always control what was going to happen. Remember I mentioned earlier that I produced a lot of those preview specials for Saturday morning. And I had this experience a couple of times where we're in this, like a new show, we're editing on Thursday night, a show that's going to air on Friday, literally. And at 2 a.m. Friday morning, 20 hours before the show is going to be broadcast nationally, we're editing the show, and in comes an episode of a new series. The first episode of a new series is delivered by the studio. They finally got it done so they can give us the show so we can pull a clip out of it and pull it in the special that's airing that night. And I watch this new show, the first episode of a new show, and I am the first person outside that studio to see it. The network hasn't seen it yet. And the person at the network calls me at 2 a.m. at the studio and says, "Mark, have you got the first episode of this new series we bought?" And I said, "Yes, it just came in." And she says, "How is it?" And I say, "I don't have time. We're editing a show that's got to air in a few hours. I don't have time to critique it. I'm just picking out a clip." And this one actor executive says, "I'm coming over. I've got to see this." And this woman comes over. She is wearing a coat over her pajamas. She drives to the studio at 2:30 in the morning, and she now takes a look at the show she bought. They bought it last February, and now it's early Friday morning in September, and the show goes on the air the next day. And she's seeing the first episode of this show, and she looks at it, and she's horrified. It's like that Springtime for Hitler look from the producers. Oh, my God, look at this mess we've got here. And there's nothing they can do about it. There's a train wreck here, and it's going on the air. There's nothing else there's no way to fix it in 24 hours, and there's no way to reanimate it or rewrite it or revoice it. And it's going on the air, and guess what? There's 12 more of them in the pipeline. And one of the things you learn in animation is that the first show stinks. The second one's not going to be that good either. There's not a huge quality fluctuation from episode to episode. I used to get calls occasionally. A show is on the air. A show's in production, and they've just seen show one. It's come back a little early, or they've seen rough cuts. The animation isn't finished, and they say, "We're not happy with how this show is going. Can you come in and write some of the last episodes and change the direction?" And I say, "Well, how many are done? How many are you doing?" They say, "We're doing 13 episodes." I said, "How many are locked and you can't make changes in them? They're too far down the assembly line." And they said, "Well, 9. And I said, "It's over. It's done. Okay? You can't fix it. There is no cartoon show in history that stung for the first 9 and got good in the last 4. You can't change it. And so I would be sitting at 2:30 in the morning in an editing bay, and there's the head of programming for one of the networks looking in horror at this show that's gotten delivered, and she hates it. and she is cursing the studio for taking shortcuts and for using a crummy subcontracting studio to do the animation, and nobody can do anything about it. And then sometimes there's a show you go, hey, this one came out pretty good. Hey, this one looks good. There's a lot of Saturday morning shows that were done back then, as there are shows being produced now that come out really good.
Yeah.
Nowadays, they're free usually from the deadline crunch. They don't have to debut September 9th. You can take some more time and you can spend a little more money and such. But in that era of Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears and the Patty Frelingham Filmation, these shows were being produced so fast, and corners were being cut, and every so often, you send an episode of a superhero show to Korea to be animated, and the studio in Korea has all the superhero artists are tied up, so they give it to one of the funny animal teams to animate. They give it to guys who just are not equipped to draw superheroes, and they draw the guys who should be drawing, fuzzy bunny cartoons are trying to draw superheroes. And the show comes back from Korea a couple of days before it's supposed to air, and you look horrified at it. And that happens many times. So I think it's amazing sometimes. If you live in that era and you went through those shows, I think it's amazing sometimes, not that some of these shows are bad, but that any of them are any good. It was a very rough thing to do sometimes. And this is why I can't ever get mad at anything in the animation field. I know how much the odds were against some of these things, and how hard some people worked to just get them done, to just get them on the air, to get them finished. I think there was an awful lot of things wrong with a lot of these shows over the years, having to do with a lot with the networks, what the network bought, with standards and practices, with some of the finances. One of the things nobody really talks about about this era of animation, and please don't ask me to elaborate because we'll be here forever, is how much of the money that was paid for the shows was put in people's pockets instead of put on the screen. How much was skimmed off by somebody who was involved in the process, who just helped themselves to a large part of the budget and said, do the show for less because I want to take this much money home. So sometimes very expensive animation.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Came out very bad. And also sometimes you had a studio that had enough good people to do 3 shows, and they did 5. I had a friend who went to an animation studio, and he looked at his work, and they said, "You're not good enough to hire. He's a young artist. You're not good enough. Come back in a couple of years. Maybe we'll go back to art school. You're just not good enough." And 3 weeks later, they needed people so desperately they hired him. He didn't get that much better in those 3 weeks.
But he can learn on the job.
Yes. Is there anything else you'd like to know while I'm here before I go eat dinner?
I have one digression question, which is a simple answer, and then we can sort of tie things up.
Okay. Go.
I was listening to an interview you did with someone else today. I can't remember which one it was, but I thought I heard you say that when Jack Kirby had transitioned into working in animation, that he had worked at some point in some way on Scooby-Doo. Is that true, or did I mishear?
Yes. Here's what it is. Jack was hired. Well, his first work in animation. Well, his first work in animation was for Max Fleischer on Popeye cartoons in the 30s. But when he got into animation in the 80s, he did the first thing he did was for Hanna-Barbera. And he worked on a Fantastic Four show, which Hanna-Barbera developed, a revival of the Fantastic Four show, but which ultimately was produced by the Patty Frelingham from what became Marvel Productions. And then he worked on that, and then at the suggestion of Steven Gerber and myself, he was hired at Ruby Spears to work on Thundar. And Ruby Spears loved him so much they signed him to a contract. And he was pretty much exclusive to Ruby Spears for the rest of his career, animation. However, as I mentioned earlier, there was a point where Ruby Spears was acquired by Taft, and Taft Broadcasting also owned Hanna-Barbera. So Ruby Spears moved to a building across the street from Hanna-Barbera and became like another division of Hanna-Barbera. Joe and Ken ran one division, and whoever was running Hanna-Barbera that week ran the Hanna-Barbera division. There was a year when Ruby Spears did not sell very many shows to the networks. You can chart this if you want to, see which seasons Ruby Spears had, 4 shows on the networks and which they had 1. But there was one year when they had They sold either one or almost none, and one or almost none is the same thing. Anyway, so because they had all these people under salary, under contract, they were loaned out to Hanna-Barbera. Jack Kirby was being paid a salary, and they didn't want him doing nothing for that money, so they gave him some layout work on Super Friends and Space Ghost and whatever Hanna-Barbera was doing. And one of the shows, they gave him some stuff to do with on Scooby-Doo, and he did some character design. I don't think he did a lot of it, but there are still floating around some model sheets of designs where Jack was given some Scooby-Doo stuff to do by Hanna-Barbera, who had loaned him out. Some of it came where Ruby Spears was producing the Hanna-Barbera show. The show was sold by Hanna-Barbera, and it said Hanna-Barbera on it, but it was done, they gave it to Ruby Spears to do in their plant because they had all those people to keep busy. And some of it was done for Hanna-Barbera because Jack had nothing to do at Ruby Spears, so to turn his salary, Hanna-Barbera gave him work. But he did a limited amount of work on Scooby-Doo.
That's fantastic.
Most of it, I believe, was in an episode which had a theme of Alice in Wonderland.
Okay.
All right.
It was such an amazing thing to hear that Jack had possibly touched the franchise. It was kind of cool.
Yeah, he did. Yes.
Well, I've taken up enough of your time, Mark. That's pretty much everything that I have. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your insight on this time in this studio and this franchise.
Yeah, I have now talked about Scooby-Doo more than I worked on Scooby-Doo.
I guess people can find you at your blog, which is
newsfromme.com, newsfromme.com.
Excellent. So if there's way more stuff that Mark has written about the franchise and animation and the people in animation and comic books. Mark, you've also got Garfield. Garfield is going?
We're on hiatus right now with Garfield. It never goes away for very long, so I'm stockpiling lasagna jokes. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your time, and possibly we'll get a chance to talk to you again sometime.
Okay, if I ever have any more about Scooby, I will talk to you again, yes.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
And that concludes my conversation with writer Mark Evanier. I hope you enjoyed that chat. It certainly was one of my favorite that I've had on the show over the years of doing it. Listening to Mark on other podcasts, telling stories about situation comedies and animation and the people that he's met, it's just fascinating. And his blog is also fascinating. So I was really looking forward to getting him on the show. And in my mind, he certainly did not disappoint. I hope in your minds as well. If you are interested in Mark and you want to follow him beyond the podcast, you can find him online. He is on Facebook at facebook.com/Evanier. Mark has a Twitter account where his handle is @Evanier, Evanier. He's also on Instagram at Mark Evanier, full name, lowercase. And Mark has recently started a series of webcasts, YouTube interviews with voice artists, other writers, generally people Mark knows in the industry. They run like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And if you're interested in comics, animation, television, comedy, I would definitely go check it out. It is News From Me TV, which is basically the same title as his blog, newsfromme.com. And News From Me TV on YouTube will get you to the channel with all of these interviews. If you want to get in touch with this podcast and let me know what you thought of this interview or the show in general, there's a few ways you can get a hold of me. You can find me on Gmail through email. It's scoobypodcast@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you just search a podcast named Scooby-Doo or at Scooby-Doo-cast, you should be able to find me on just about all the social medias. If you want to support the show, like, share, follow, and subscribe wherever you run across the show or whatever your preferred platform is. And feel free to share amongst friends or family, anybody you know that might be interested in Scooby-Doo or in animation in general, or Hanna-Barbera. I mean, I do cover Hanna-Barbera characters as well. Send them my way or send me their way, whichever one works easier for you. Word of mouth is a powerful tool, and it's one of the best ways to get in the minds and ears and hearts of listeners. If you get the show off of iTunes, I'd appreciate a review. 5 stars is always best. It helps with the algorithms, helps get the show visible. That's kind of all I've got for right now. Next time around, I'm going to be having an interview that I conducted with another DC Hanna-Barbera creator. That is Jimmy Palmiotti. Jimmy is a longtime comic book professional. He is a writer and artist. He wrote the Jetsons series, which was part of, I think, Phase 2? I'm trying to think now. I think it was Phase 2 of the DC Hanna-Barbera launch. And I'm looking forward to getting that out. Should be coming out soon. And I've already started lining up some interviews for after that. So looking forward to things going forward. Oh, and before I forget, I also have a new Apocalypse Variations interview that is just about ready to go and will be showing up on the WordPress blog, which is scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. So watch for that coming soon. Thanks again so much for checking me out, downloading the show, listening to the conversation. Your presence and your patronage is very much appreciated. Hope you come back for the next episode. Be sure to check the social media for updates. It's usually where I announce things are going up. If you're not subscribed and it doesn't just automatically pop into your feed, that is the best way to find stuff out. So that's all I got. I hope everybody is doing well in these troubled times. And we'll see you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.